Hey, we're good.
Okay.
All right.
So anyway, there's a lot going on there.
No kidding.
Yeah.
You
And,
introduce?
I think
Go ahead.
we're
It's up
seeing,
there.
we really have an opportunity to see some things that nobody else is able to do because ours, after
Sit
you
over here.
prepare the slide, you can take a look at
No.
it. Okay, should we start?
Yeah, first introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll introduce and pray.
And try to stay in close to the.
Okay. Like, what-
Yeah.
There's my computer over there.
Okay.
We'll see which way it works out. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm Jim Hoff, and have been here once before, and so I'm happy to be able to come back again. And just my bio, I'm a computer designer, and also lived in Israel for 4 years, so learned Hebrew and have that as a background for some things. We were foster parents. First of all, we were group home parents before we were parents, and had about 40 kids come through our house. We were licensed for 8, and so that was really what brought me to the Lord, was during the time that we were group home parents and weren't able to. We could do well with the kids, but then they'd go home and they'd fall right back in. And when we really came to the Lord and were able to share with them the God, Jesus, and make a new life out of them, they would go back into their bad situation and be able to maintain it. So that was a really special thing. So I think that's it. We worked for Control Data Corporation, Elbit Computers in Israel, and then Honeywell a little bit, and a couple other companies like that. Yeah, Lucent and Agir, Lucent Technologies and Agir Systems. So, okay?
Good.
And so let's pray. Lord God, I just pray that you would use this time for your glory, and that we would gain a better appreciation of who you are and how you relate to this world. Thank you. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So, let's see. Where I went up that. Okay. The Y chromosome atom. Now, do you know, I'm going to probably just slide down and do a little bit on the chromosomes just so you get an idea. So let me go down through a couple of these, and we'll get back to all these things. But I was going to show you the Y chromosome is what's circled in red down in the bottom right. And the chromosomes are how your DNA is set up. And I've already had this DNA out, the whole 100 feet of it, but so we won't do that this time. But that's what this is. And the way that the DNA it works is it's got these two. It's got 4 different amino acids called just mnemonically they're A, C, G, and T. And A and the T always go together. And so you can think of whatever you want. You could be pink is A and red is T, because these are always the same that way. And the other one, that's the C and G, would be the black and white then, in either order. It doesn't much matter. But so that's what this is, and this is the actual gene for collagen. One of the genes for collagen. There's several of them, but that's what this is, and it's 5,000 units long. And so I guess this is just a short one. The long one's this one here. But same thing, just a lot longer. There it is. And so that's how DNA works. It's the most densest information storage system on Earth or in the universe. It's just amazingly dense. And in your body, you have it's about 300 books printed in each cell of your body. And they're all the same. At least they start out the same because they come from the one cell. But they change. And you've got 200 different cell types in your body, and they will get modified as they go to these different sites and to do the job that has to be done in that cell. And it's just to really realize how mind-boggling it is. Your body, these things have to direct all these cells individually to do the function that they're doing at the time that they are. So, a newborn baby, it's got joints, and those joints have to move. Everything has to be connected. They have to be the right length. They have to be updated and so forth. And that all has to happen from this one group of one set of DNA. There's about 3 billion base pairs in there. Okay, And that's what puts that all together. I also brought, you can take a look, this helps you to really be able to see, try to keep you so you don't have to, there. This is a mock-up, 3D printed mock-up of a DNA spiral, and this is the base pair right here. So if you wanted to call this A, this would be T. If this is C, this would be G. The 4 colors match that. And so I can take one of these off so you can see what they look like this. And some amazing things are true about this. First of all, these fit together. Well, there's one, and here's the other kind. And I guess I couldn't tell you which one is which, but one has 3 bonds, you can see, between the two. The other one has 2 bonds between the two here. And so they this one can't connect with this one. They can only connect the way you see them here. But they can go in there in one of 4 ways. It can be this on one side, or this on that side, or that on that side, or that on that side. So it can hold 4 different states in there. And in computers, that's 2 bits of information. It takes 2 bits of information to hold 4 different states, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And so this holds 2 bits, this one holds 2 bits, and this one holds 2 bits, and all the way down the line. So the 3 billion base pairs hold 6 billion bits of information. So then if you know about computers, usually we talk about bytes, right? It's 8 bits to a byte. So you divide that by 8, take 6 trillion, divide it by 8, and you get 750 million bytes of information in your so that'd be 750 megabytes, if you want to think about it that way. That's almost exactly 720 megabytes as a CD-ROM. So it holds almost the same amount of information as a CD-ROM does. But you might want to hear it. Pass this around if you want to see. So there's that and these 2. And
Is that base 2?
that's base 2. Now you can do it any base you want, but computer usually do base 2 as a standard. You can do hexadecimal, octal, and things like that.
If you were God, what base would it be? Base
Well,
2?
he did it in base 2.
Okay.
Or you could call it base 4 though, too. But it holds 2 bits in each one of those. But that's a really nice little thing. I want to get the 3D printer to make those for us. So that gives you an idea of what's going on there. Then zeroing in on the Y chromosome, we were wondering, David and I were wondering whether that's the shortest chromosome in there, and it turns out it's not. The Y chromosome is about 60 million base pairs long, and chromosome 21 is about 45, so it's shorter, and that's the shortest one. And they're supposed to be long to short, but I think they did that before they knew what's really going on inside there. Probably in the 30s or 40s. As soon as they could isolate these and do that, they assigned them numbers. But then they found out, 22 is a little shorter, is actually a little longer than 21, for example. So, and then of course, here's the X and the Y, and the X chromosome. All people have X chromosomes. Women have 2 X chromosomes. Men have 1 X chromosome and a Y chromosome. So if you're XX, you're a woman. If you're XY, you're a man. And that kind of answers all the questions we have, for what's going on about, what is a woman? They're going around asking. They made a whole movie about what's a woman. A woman is a person with XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes. That's all it takes. Mm-hmm. And that is what dictates all the differences. The differences between men and women are huge. The number of differences there. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? That's what they say. But so many of the marital things require really understanding what your spouse is about. Understanding that when you go shopping, guys want to hunt, women want to browse. It's just different things. You go into a store. Is this one what you want, dear? No, I don't know. That's not quite what I'm looking for, but I'll keep looking. I'm sure I'll find it soon. Well, let me know. We'll shoot it and take it home as soon as you find what it is. And, but the men and women are just very different in so many different ways. Another way of looking at that is the fact that if you're a paramedic and you're in the ambulance and you're taking somebody to the hospital and you're calling them up to 3 things they want to know, right? Male or female, race, and age.
No.
We have a 35-year-old female, because so many things depend on race. Like there are many different diseases that blacks and whites have separately, for example. And age makes a big difference, but male or female makes a huge difference. So that's the things that they want to know. So, we should really know that. And that's what the Bible says. He made them male and female. Another thing that's very interesting about that is there are male and female plants. What in the world is going on with that? And these plants oftentimes take very circuitous routes for reproducing. You have to have bumblebee or bees to pollinate to grab the pollen, get on their legs, and then walk over or fly over to another plant and deposit it. So all those are evidences that some super intelligent agent made all these things that are going on. Okay.
And is it man that has the fused chromosome? Is that 21, or is that
That has what?
the fused chromosome?
Chromosome 2, I believe, is the one that they say, but that really is not true. It's been shown to be demonstrably there's a centrosome, I think it's called centrosome, I think, in the middle, and they thought that they had identified a centrosome on our chromosome 2, but it's just not true. Yeah.
Are these shapes characteristic of the particular chromosomes, or is that just...
Those are the actual chromosomes, yeah. And I think all of them would look the same. I mean, they'll lie a little different, but the banding on there would be the same, for example. And and the banding comes out because of what amino acids are present in that particular part of it. And I just wanted to show you. This is the fun part. This has nothing to do with the Y chromosome, but the fact that you can see you can see this under a microscope. We shouldn't be able to, because all of those together are 6 feet long, and if I was holding one here, you wouldn't be able to see it. It's narrower than the wavelength of light. It's about 2 nanometers, and light is 550 nanometers, I believe it is. So you wouldn't even be able to see it. But the reason why you can see it is because if this was the chromosome like that, what happens is when it's being packaged for for delivery, basically, is it gets wound and wound and wound and wound. Now, it isn't twisted like that, what I'm going to do here. But if you've ever had a model airplane where you got a propeller with a rubber band on it, wind it, wind it, wind it, wind it. Well, if you wind it so far, whoops.
Am I supposed to hold it?
Yeah, you're supposed to hold it first of all, but I went too fast. I forget. I put it on a Dremel tool. I did it with a drill, but it just took forever. So this thing will do it fast, but there. Okay, hang on to that. And I'll hang on to this end, and I'll try to do it a little less. So yeah, if you have that airplane thing, I got to just go like. And you can see that what it's doing is twisting, and then when it gets so far, now they're already starting to twist here. If I bring it together, it'll kind of knot a second time. Sometimes it knots 2 or 3 times. But that's what's happening, basically. It's really what's happening, I believe, is there are what are called histones in the makeup. They're proteins, and these wrap themselves on those histones, and they keep wrapping and wrapping and wrapping and wrapping until finally they're so thick that these things are still under a microscope, but they're fat enough so you can see them because they're being.
The histones are like spools.
Yeah. This is just so fast that. But another way I could do it is go like this. But you can see that as it does it, it just wraps itself until finally, when you get to about here, there is what you're seeing in the microscope. Something like that, and that's how it works. So, anyhow, that's just kind of a fun thing to know. But so let me start going through the presentation here then. So I'll go back to the beginning. Let's see, which way am I going? There we go. Okay. Let me get that out of there. There, okay. So, Dave and I have been trying to come up with a name for methodological naturalism. You can see up in there on top. And we probably talked about it last time a little bit, right? I don't remember if I did or not. But methodological naturalism just doesn't roll off the tongue very easily. And so I think that's why it hasn't become a very well understood. People don't realize it. But so I'm going to call it the big assumption, going off the Big Bang. And if I could think of a shorter way to say assumption, I haven't been able to think of a way. But I kind of came to the realization that Big Bang became popular because it's neutral. It doesn't say big, good or bad. In fact, it was invented as a
Derogatory.
yeah. It was meant to be a put down, but it was so easy to say and everything that it was overtaken, and now that's the only way people know it is the Big Bang. Well, the big assumption, okay, and the big assumption has two parts. One is that good science only deals with natural phenomena, and I would agree with that. I think everybody would agree with that. Science is not about, it's not about dreams and angels and heaven and hell and miracles. Those are all things that are, a different study. Why did a miracle happen? You don't go out and study that. You can do secondary things where you can try and find out whether it was a miracle by looking at the physical evidence, things like that. But the study of these is for theology or something like that. But the second assumption that's made, that's where we have a problem. Good science supposedly only considers natural causes for natural phenomena, and that's a problem because they're not saying that you have to be a naturalist, which is a philosophical. That's a philosophical position, right? Now you say there is no supernatural. Now we, I hope in this room, are supernaturalists, which doesn't mean we deny the natural, but there is the natural and there is the supernatural. Okay, so if there is a supernatural, and realize too that if you're a naturalist, you don't need the methodological naturalism assumption, presupposition, because there is nothing beyond it. When they're trying to talk about methodological naturalism, they're saying that yes, there could be a God, there could be miracles and everything, but it's too hard for us to deal with miracles and things. So when you put on your scientist white frock and you go into the laboratory, you have to forget about Jesus Christ and miracles and things like that, and just look for natural causes. Well, if you're not going to deny that supernatural causes can occur, then you're no longer looking for the truth, right? If the truth is a supernatural cause, you have to allow that as a possibility, or you and that's what's happened. So people like what's the name of that? What was that? The group that came up in the 1980s or so that was examining Genesis and I can't remember what they call it. The name of it, it's escaping me. But anyhow, they were examining the New Testament and so forth. But one thing you couldn't say is that Jesus was the Son of God. So all of the things that they came out of that were naturalistic types of things. So when you're looking at the crucifixion, maybe Jesus swooned, the swoon theory. He passed out and then they took him off the cross and he went there and revived and so forth. Or the replacement theory that the Muslims believe, it wasn't Jesus on the cross at all. Those are all okay because they're naturalistic explanations. But the idea that he resurrected, he died and resurrected would not be allowed. So that's the problem with the methodological naturalism, is that it doesn't allow for one of the answers. You can't have both. You can't deny certain answers and still say that you're looking for the truth. Okay? So, remember, the big assumption is not a product of science. It is the unproven foundation for a God-rejecting science. And I put that science in quotes because really, they accuse us of pseudoscience. That is pseudoscience. It's because they've restricted the range of explanations that they allow to keep it within the natural realm, which as a naturalist you would do. But, they want us as Christians to bend to that, and that's the problem we have. Okay? That's one thing I wanted to point out. This is not Y chromosome yet. But here's another thing. It's just been very encouraging these days for what we're seeing in the scientific realm. Now, we always want to say the Bible and Answers in Genesis makes a big point of this. The Bible doesn't have to be proven. Oftentimes you hear people say the Bible is a tiger. You don't have to prove it. You just let it go, and it'll do its thing. But one thing is you have to make sure that there are people who need to know that the Bible makes sense. And I think I was one of those. You start out, I was in college, and you start out, you're examining the Bible. You're the critic, and the Bible is the thing you're looking at. And as it starts, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Oh, there's another thing. And as you do, you start lifting it up until finally you come to the realization that the things that you don't understand yet it's not the Bible's fault. It's your fault that you don't understand these things yet. I was putting a list in my Bible, things like Jacob was using a stick to divide the sheep, and he'd get the speckled and whatever it was. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but I put that in as a criticism. Come on, that doesn't follow Mendelian science, that you'd be doing that. Well, I no longer look at it that way. I've gotten to the point where so many things have been verified that I now look to the Bible as a standard, and where it's wrong, it's me that's wrong, not the Bible that's wrong. And so it is important for us to have the science so that we can see some of these things, because I really remember the first time that I talked to somebody who was a young Earth creationist, and I was a theistic evolutionist. I had made the commitment to Jesus Christ, but I thought evolution was God's way of doing it. And I said, I thought what I'd find is that he would have one or two things that are anomalies in the scientific world. Science is explaining everything, but here's this one little thing, and here's this one little thing, and I was going to, probably pick them apart and show where he was wrong about that. Well, he says it's not just one thing; it's all ranges of things: geology, paleontology, biology, genetics, many different areas, history, and everything are showing that these things are true. So that's what we're seeing today, and we're seeing, one of them. I don't think people really realize it, but time having a beginning was not thought by the secular scientists, And in fact, when it started to become, there were inklings that time did have a beginning. When they were learning about entropy and finding that, if there was an infinite amount of time in the past, we should be at our maximum entropy point. You know what entropy is? Entropy is basically from a thermodynamic level. It has to do with work that you can do, useful work. But from a math level, it has to do with probability. When something is in its highest entropy state, it's in its most probable state. And things are always going from the least probable or less probable to the more probable state. That's what probability means, what's going to probably happen. So from a mathematical standpoint, things are going, entropy is always rising. If we had an infinite amount of time, no matter what curve you were going, if you were doing tangential, sine, exponential, all of them would have reached their final value in an infinite amount of time. So that's when they find out, we have no explanation for this. It's got to be, there has to be a beginning to time. And when they first started proposing that, many scientists said, that sounds too biblical, and they really they recoiled at it because it just sounded too biblical. Well, they did finally get over it, and in the 1920s and so forth, that became the vogue, and still is today. But that was a Christian idea. The first word in the Bible is Bereshit, means in the beginning, and that right there says it all for that. And Genesis 1 has a lot. We don't need to go into that, but nevertheless, okay. So there's one, fresh flesh, and that's what we were showing these slides. We were showing you fresh flesh in dinosaur fossils reveals that dinosaurs were buried recently and in a cataclysmic flood. It wasn't just that they fell over, died of old age, and then didn't rot. They had to be covered and kept in an anaerobic state during the time that they were being fossilized. Okay, and also the evidence that dinosaurs and humans coexisted, and there's many evidences of that. What's the name of Dr. Dino? Hovind.
Kent Hovind.
He has like an hour and a half video on that where he goes through all the things, and anyhow. Compelling evidence confirms the narrative of the Hebrew slavery in Egypt. If you've watched the video called Patterns of Evidence, that's what that's about. That the secular that would be archaeologists, hold that the Egyptologists, yep, and they hold that the dating system that they have says that the Hebrews would have been there during the time of the city of Ramses, and they've dug up the city of Ramses and they've looked at it and they can't find any evidence of Joseph or any of that kind of stuff. But underneath the city of Ramses is a city called Avaris. Avaris. Not Avaris, Avaris. That's how I remember the word Avaris. But anyhow, that city has all kinds of evidence of Joseph. There's a little encampment where it's a beautiful Canaanite-style home or palace, and it's got 12 graves empty in the in the backyard basically. And one of them is a big pyramidal grave with a statue in it. and they can actually see colors on the robe of the statue. So they've got the many-colored robe of Joseph there. You know, all kinds of things like that, and there's many, many more things. But when they move the timeline 500 years, that all this stuff falls into place. I know my son Nathan said it. At Dallas Theological, they teach that, you know, the Avaris theme. But all the secular ones still hold that it's 500 years away. And in that movie that I was mentioning, Patterns of Evidence, they ask an Egyptologist, an Israeli guy, you know, here's some new evidence. We want to look at it. He says, no, we've moved on from that. And the reason why they've moved on from it is because their entire structure is based on that. All the dating of all the countries around it and everything are based on the dating of Egypt, and it would just throw out all their careers. All their work would become garbage. And so, you know, and that, you'd have to sympathize with them. You know, if you heard what one of the Webb telescope astronomers was saying, you know, I wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and wonder if my whole career has been for nothing. What the Webb telescope's been finding, and that's the same kind of thing. You know, you probably won't be able to hold until these people die off that hold these positions, because they're so ingrained and so requiring on it, you know. And like the United States government's standard position is the evolutionary position. So if you're going to make a request for a grant, it's got to be an evolutionary one. They won't accept it. You know, we can sneak in sometimes. You know, like Mark Armitage puts out things. Oh, we found a nerve fiber in a Triassic. It was a T-Rex, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. You know, and as long as he doesn't say this proves the young Earth or anything like that, it just says it's kind of remarkable. He gets away with it, and so he's on the cover of Microscopy Today, which is the organ of the scientific organ for them. But you know, that's what they're up against. That was that. The principle of mediocrity. Remember that? That's no longer in vogue. The principle of mediocrity has been in vogue since the time of Galileo. And basically it says, we live in a humdrum galaxy, in a humdrum area on that. We're right in the middle of it, you know, no special place, not in the middle, not on the very edge, but just a random place, you know, in a random galaxy, in a random place. That's the principle of mediocrity. There's nothing special. Then they came out with some books called like Rare Earth and The Privileged Planet, where they're saying everything is special about the Earth. The tilt is special. The rate at which it rotates is special. The size of the moon is special. We have the biggest moon ratio to the planet of any of them. Where it is in the radiation on it. The fact that we have global warming. You know, let me ask, what's the number one global warming gas?
CO2.
No? Water vapor. Nobody knows that. And don't feel bad that you said CO2. I asked graduate student people at Lehigh University, because I was working with international students, what it was. And they say CO2, and then when I say, no. Methane? No. And go down the line, water vapor, are you kidding? And one of them said he's going to go back and tell her husband, because they're both in environmental studies. And I got a rude lashing by one of the people there, because we're at this picnic, and she came over as the wife of a civil engineer at Lehigh University. She said, "You're filling these people's minds with mush. No, we have all kinds of good evidence that the things you're saying are not true." And she just really got angry. But I was challenging their worldview basically. And these people were like, these graduate students like, "Wow, really? Water vapor is a goal." In fact, if we didn't have water vapor, we would be below freezing here on Earth, because our black body temperature at this distance from the sun is such that we would not be, except for the fact that we're absorbing light because of global warming of water vapor. That's why desert nights are so cold, for example, because they don't have any water vapor, and so they just cool off really quickly. So anyhow, the principle of mediocrity morphs into the Goldilocks principle. Now, everything is just what it's supposed to be. We're just the right place out in just the right size galaxy with just this and just that. And that goes all the way through. Carbon, it's wonderful how carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and all these different things work together. So, fine-tuning, wow, fine tuning just destroys everything. That's the whole idea of why we have a multiverse, is because of fine tuning. In order to explain how we could have these things 10 to the 123rd power. Any idea how big that number is? That's what one of the secular scientists says has to be the value of the energy density of the universe. The energy density has to be the value that it is to a value of 1 part in 10 to the 123rd. Now, there's 10 to the 80th particles in the universe. So that means it would take 10 to the 40th universes to assign a 0 to each one of those particles to write out 10 to the 123rd. And that's not the number. That's just the exponent. 10 to the 123rd zeros on it. And so that's what they say, we're beyond. This is infinity is the only thing that will swallow that. And so that's basically what they say. And, drum roll, genetics confirms biblical timelines. Okay, so in this line, this is just yet another one of those things that is just amazingly pointing to a young Earth position, and things like what we're finding. And I want to throw out just a kind of a theorem that I have that I haven't published or anything like that, but I think about this, that Genesis 1 says that everyone has the knowledge they need to know that God exists. And there are no people that don't know that God exists, that even believe that God exists. There are only those that suppress that knowledge. That's in 1:18 to 20. And in order for that to be the case, for both the 3-year-old looking at an acorn and wondering how that acorn could produce that tree and saying, wow, that's a God thing, Okay, but then you get to the PhD biologist, that's nothing. But you go to them, and they've got other things. The more they learn, the more they find out they don't know. The child doesn't know how a tree happens. Well, this professor knows how the tree happens. But there's other things. They just recently found out how the capillary action can get the liquids up 200 feet up into these tall trees, because it's supposed to be capillary action that does that. It doesn't go that high. And these things are being learned all the time. The point is, the vistas that they're opening up in terms of what they don't know are wider than the areas that they're learning. So when we thought that we knew about the Miller-Urey experiment back in 1953, we thought they were saying we had it. It's going to be a matter of months or years before we generate life in the lab. Well, then they found there's a few more problems to it, and they found out that there's not only that's the first dimension, is the DNA code. The second dimension is putting it into one of these things like what I was showing here in the protein. Then you have to fold it. That's the third dimension. And then you got to have these things change over time. All these different things, and as they find them, it gets more and more complicated. So that really we know more, but the amount that we realize that have to know is less. Imagine what we're going to find out when we actually figure out how the brain works. We don't have a clue. How do you put a brain into DNA? And make it produce itself? People tend to think, well, it's just kind of gray matter and it learns things. No, if you don't have already in there things like, for instance, that translate sounds and pictures into 3D images, you have a place in your brain that produces that's its job, image processor. And people who are blind actually transfer the plasticity of your brain changes that ability from your eyes to your ears, and they can make 3D images with their ears, with their sounds. So how do you produce that image processing area inside your brain out of DNA? Well, okay. So anyhow, we'll just keep on going here. What is a signature? A little bit of a different subject, but a signature you probably know. You write your signature on a piece of paper, and it shows that you are who you say you are. Right? Well, it turns out signatures are not really all that good. They can be forged pretty easily. But we now have a signature is something that says the characteristic mark that serves to set apart or identify. And your fingerprint is a signature. A much better signature, by the way, than your pen. It just cannot be duplicated except by making something that looks taking your signature and copying it, and sometimes you can fool a camera or something. But anyhow, a signature is something that's supposed to identify you as a separate identity. And digital signatures do that incredibly well. I know a lot about digital signatures, but they cannot be, at least with the technology we know today, they cannot be forged. If you, a properly done digital signature is 100%, as far as we know. Now, there are some theories, theorems that have to do with that. There's what's called a trapdoor theorem, which says that you can take this number and put it through a process and get a second number, but you can't take the second number and go back to the first number. Even though there's a one-to-one correspondence, you can't do it. There are some algorithms that will take you from A to B, and you can't go from B to A. And you can use that information, that ability, to be able to, you broadcast the B as your signature. And you say, okay, make one of these. If you're who you say you are, make one of these, and they won't be able to do it unless they know the A part. And you can't get that from the signature. Isn't that amazing? But that's kind of thing. It's gone way beyond a fingerprint. Okay, but I wanted to show you then a similar thing is what you call a diagnostic, where something is diagnostic if when you see it, it tells you exactly what it is. An example of that would be an all-white head and tail on an otherwise dark-colored bird. That's diagnostic of a bald eagle. If you see that, you're seeing a bald eagle. And there's no other bird that looks like that. Okay, that's what you're talking about. Well, now, here we have different light bars. These bars are the different colors that you see in the top thing. And when you have a certain material, it will put off a signature that only that material has. That's very important for like the Webb telescope, because that's how one of the things that they're finding that's just not right. They can see the signature for neon and the signature for oxygen back 300 million years after the Big Bang, supposedly, and that's way before they could have had any. What happens is the first time, according to their theories, the first time these galaxies come together, they should be able to produce lots of hydrogen, some helium, and I think the next one's beryllium.
Lithium.
Lithium is number three protons. Okay, and a little bit of lithium, but nothing beyond that. Well, oxygen they're finding, and neon, oxygen is 8, I think, and neon is 10, if I remember right. And they're finding that in these signatures in the things that are coming back from so far away. Now, the way that they can tell it's from that far away is because of the redshift. And we're not going to talk about redshift here today, but nonetheless, these things get shifted into the red when they're going away from you, or into the blue when they're coming towards you. And so you can see the signature, but it's a signature for neon, and it's coming from this galaxy that's too far away to be producing this stuff. And that was one of 6 things that were really amazing. We could have another session on that. But that's, okay, so that's the signature. Well, there's a similar thing that goes on with Y chromosome, okay? Because, and let's see if we can get there. Well, okay, I'll come back to this because this is important, but maybe I've got a wrong order here. I'm going to go back to, okay, right here. Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Let me explain a little bit about what they are. Some of you may know Y chromosome is the one chromosome that only men have. But the important thing to know about it is that when it gets reproduced, all the other ones mix. They get in a hodgepodge. Not even chromosome to chromosome. Even the pieces of a chromosome break apart and mix. And so you might on one chromosome have 20 parts, and 10 of them come from this, or maybe 14 from this one, and 6 from this one, or whatever. And they mix, and so you don't see anything beyond maybe 1 or 2 or 3 generations back from your history. If you do a DNA test, it'll tell you, yeah, you're German, you got some Indian heritage, or Jewish, or whatever it is. But it'll tell you where it comes from, and they're getting better and better, where they can actually find a region and everything. But it just goes back 1 or 2 generations. The Y chromosome, on the other hand, there's no change except for mutations. You get, your father, us men in the room, our father gave us our Y chromosome with no changes except for any mutations that might have happened in that. And if you're a female in this room, your dad or your brother or any other continuous male line will have that Y chromosome that you would have had if you were a male. So you can follow that all the way back up through the history. And now the reason why I was showing the spectrum is because the Y chromosome is 59, now we know it's 62 million base pairs long. That's big compared to the number of mutations. Because I'm going to go down here and just show you what some of these things are. Y chromosome is only present in males, and the mitochondrial Eve is in both males and females. Males get it from their mother. You know, everybody gets it from their mother. So the line does follow its way down, but once it gets to the man, it's lost because it doesn't show up in his sperm. So it's only the mother that it goes down, but we men need the Y chromosome. I need the mitochondrial, and we get it from our mother. Okay, and it's inherited from the father, the Y chromosome, and the mitochondrial Eve is inherited from the mother. And same thing happens with the mitochondrial. There are no changes to it except mutation changes. Unlike all the other ones where there's Mendelian changes going on. There's mixing going on, and so you get some of your father and some of your mother. Oh, you have your father's eyes and your mother's hair or whatever, you know, or brow line or something. No, with the Y chromosome, it's exactly what your father had, except for any mutations that occurred. Okay, it's 62,460,029 base pairs long. That was just found out last August. They just finally. I've got a website on it down at the bottom there that they said after 20 years, it took them 20 years to find this out, but they got the exact number now. And we've known for a long time that the mitochondrial Eve is 16,569 base pairs long. Little difference there, right? It's about 4,000, a difference of 4,000, and that makes a big difference here in what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so here's my thing, and these are about a quarter inch long. I think they're 8 millimeters, or 6 millimeters. But anyhow, they're about a quarter inch. At a quarter inch, if you were to make the Y chromosome out of quarter inch beads, it would be 246 miles long. Okay, so go from here to where? What's 256 miles from? You know, so if you're going to have a mutation, it's going to be somewhere in that 246 miles. For the mitochondrial Eve, it's 345 feet. It's a lot shorter, and that's the reason why the majority, there's a lot of stuff being done on the Y chromosome, on the mitochondrial Eve as well. But the Y chromosome shows great promise because there's so many base pairs there. And the next thing is nothing that matters. Roughly 2 mutations per generation. Now Dave and I have been looking at this. One place said 1. John Sandberg just put a thing on, Dr. John Sandberg, last night we watched, and he says 1. But others are saying 3 and 4, right?
Yeah, they goes from 3 to 5.
3 to 5? Okay, so somewhere in that 1 to 5, you know, because John Sandberg is a pretty good expert too. But anyhow, that's not very many. So even let's say it's 2, just for today. If it's 2 mutations on the average each time across 62 million base pairs, and we're only how far do you think we are from Noah? Just off the top of your head, don't calculate. But how do you think it's in the hundreds of thousands, a million? How far are we? How many generations?
150?
Right on. Yeah, 150 is about what it is. 150 generations, where each generation is producing, say, 2 mutations. By the way, the roughly 2 mutations I have in quotes because that's right on Wikipedia. But I think they're a little bit behind. Probably is. There's newer things that are coming out and they're not keeping quite up to date. But anyhow, say 2, and if there's 150 generations, that's only 300 mutations out of 59 million. So what that means is that there's almost no chance that once that mutation shows up on your Y chromosome, that it's going to change back. There's nothing. You know, that's a miracle on its own. You know, it would be almost impossible. Now, sometimes because it's an average of 2, sometimes it'll be 0, sometimes it'll be 1, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5. But on the average, it comes down to 2. And so, in the 150 mutations, 150 generations, you get 300 mutations. Now, if you go back and you look at that thing that we were looking at here before, if I can go back to that, I don't know if there's ways to go back. Here we go. We've got a thing that looks very similar to this for the Y chromosome. Start out with Noah, okay? And we can't go back further than Noah because we don't really have anything to compare it to. Noah is our most recent common patriarchal ancestor, MR, however that turns out to be. but he's the one. He's our standard. We can't go back to Adam anymore because there's nothing to check it. But Noah is the one that we are going back to. Everyone, all humans are descendants of Noah, and all males get their Y chromosome DNA from him. So Noah had 3 sons. On average, those 3 sons would have had a couple of mutations on their mark. Now they've got a signature. you got that signature, you are a son of Ham. You're a son of Japheth or a son of Shem. And that is going to be permanent throughout the entire next 150 generations and far beyond that, because there's plenty of room there for them to happen. And they're so far apart you couldn't even find them, 60 million. If you were to take this, one of these displays, it's about, say, 1,000 by 1,000, which is about what that is. That's 1 million. There's 60 million. So each pixel on there would have 60 base pairs on there, just to show, all the DNA that's in the Y chromosome. Just not going to happen. That are going to mix up. So you've got that digital fingerprint of Ham, Shem, or Japheth on that. Now they have children, and each one of them gets a digital fingerprint on there, and so it goes on down. We could look at the men, the Y chromosomes, and we could put together, if we got enough of it, we could put together the entire tree. We could see exactly who comes from what, where we're related, and so forth. In fact, there's a man at Answers to Genesis, Nathaniel Jeanson. This is going to be his life work. He says he wouldn't be able to complete the things that he could do just in the Y chromosome study in his lifetime. But he's wanting to collect all this information that he can, and we can put together who is related to whom. And I think that he and Ken Ham both did it, and they did a web thing on there, YouTube, and they say that 24 generations up, they match, they come together. 24 generations up, and then below that, there's changes, but there's about 48 for each one of them that differ them from each other. So you see how that works? It's just amazing. You've got the whole history of mankind in the collective information of all the Y chromosomes that are. And the same thing is true for the mitochondrial DNA, but it's not as clear because the mitochondria is only 16,000 base pairs, and you only have a mutation about once every 10 generations. So your great grandmother might have a different, you might be different from them, but in general, no, you're the same. And that was one of the things that they really were having a problem with. One of the papers that came out back in, I think it was 2003 that we saw the paper, but it was on paperwork that was done in 1997 that they did this work on the mitochondrial DNA, and the first thing they did was they looked at the mitochondrial DNA of all these women, and then they looked at where the chimp was, and based on the differences that they found between the women there and the chimp, they figured that they were about 160,000 years different. That was where we separated. It was 160,000 years from the first from the apex of that triangle. Well, then somebody did instead of a longitudinal, they did a broadside. They took many women and measured their Y chromosome, their mitochondrial DNA, and found that they were very, very similar. So similar that they wrote in their paper, and it'll be on one of the slides here, that according to what they were seeing, the most recent common female ancestor would have been 6,000 years ago. But of course, that can't be the case. She immediately, her name was Ann Gibbons, she immediately discounted her own work because it would have excluded her from the scientific community if she had held to that being true. Yeah.
Have you read The Seven Daughters of Eve from Brian Sykes?
No, I haven't.
He narrows it down to 7 different groups of DNA clusters that most of the research has shown that women come from one of 7 different groups.
Okay.
He was the top geneticist at Oxford. He died a few years ago.
It sounds like something I should check into.
Yeah, he's got several other books. What is that? Adam's Curse, which talks about the male DNA degrading, like you were talking about, and then DNA USA, where he went around the United States and sampled, I should say clandestinely, Indian DNA. Yeah, all 3 are just amazing books.
Wow. Yeah. Well, speaking of Indian, you mean Native American, like Indian,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Nathaniel Jeanson has kind of made that his thing, is to find out when these different Native American Indian tribes came through. And he found that, for instance, there's the Pueblos and there's the, what's the other one, the Apaches? No. remember the other one is.
Hokies, Navajos.
Navajos, I think it was. And the Navajos were, let's see which one's which one's, I'm gonna get my numbers wrong. But what they believe in their own lore is that, you know, one is older than the other, and that turns out to be true.
Mhm.
That those things are true. So, you know, we live in Bethlehem, and the, and I got, well, I'm not gonna be able to give you the names of these Indians, but they're up in that area, and they have a book called The Red Record, and it's been very highly discounted by all the contemporary people. But it talks about things that are right out of the Bible in their background. And I think he's accused of being a Christian or something like that.
If you look at the American Indians out in the west, the mid New Mexico area now, a lot of their spiritual stories basically have a Bible alignment.
Yeah, and they have good reason to keep those things because they're sacred, you know. And so they really want to keep those things. It's the Lenni Lenape Indians is what I was thinking of.
No pun intended, right?
Yeah. Anyhow, so let me go back down here and finish filling out that thing here. We were looking at this, and let's see, roughly 2 mutations, and the ones for the mitochondrial Eve are all over the place because of what I was telling you about. That if you do it from the chimp, you get a really large number. But this woman that did a broadside came up with 6,000 years, which she immediately discounted. But that would be the correct one. I mean, that would be. I'm not saying that. I'm not just saying that because it's the one I believe. But the chimp one is making wild assumptions about the fact that we are even related to the chimps in the first place, and how far we are. Whereas this other one is actual just raw data, right out of the, here's the numbers, here's how far apart they are, and you can draw the conclusions right from that. Okay, well here's what it is. This is out of Wikipedia. Although the informal name Y chromosomal Adam is a reference to the biblical Adam, this should not be misconstrued as implying that the bearer of the chromosome was the only human male alive during his time. The other male contemporaries may also have descendants alive today, but not by definition through solely patrilineal descent. In other words, none of them would have an unbroken male line of descendants, sons, connecting them to currently living people. Now, while what he says is true, it's absurd, because they're not saying that there was one other person there along with the Y chromosome Adam. He was a part of a tribe of 1,000. There was 500 other men there, and all those 500 men. I'll show you a picture here. This. Now this was actually doing it for the mitochondrial, but it's the same picture. You just instead of doing it from the women, you do it from the men. Okay. What they're saying is that this is real. This going down here. This is inferred or assumed because there's no evidence of it. There's no evidence that those things exist, but they want to say that in order to fill out. And I actually went on Wikipedia one time and changed it. The next day it was changed back. Because I'm in the deep minority, and so the experts went in. And this is obviously a young earther.
No reference, right?
What's that?
No reference.
Yeah, no reference. Anybody can do the change, but then it goes to a panel, and it gets dropped immediately. So, but nevertheless, it's so absurd. The reason why I say it's absurd is because you've got the one man here, or woman, depending which one you're looking at, and you've got 499 other men that are also there. In order for there to be no evidence of these anywhere, those 499, none of them would have a man who marries a woman in the other line. So that the man is there and the woman's there, and so they end up being down here, but actually being from another man. There is no now. It's possible that there are people, because we don't have all the genomes, sequenced right now. But of all the ones that they found, they all have come from this one most recent common ancestor. In this case, this is a matriarchal, but there's also a patriarchal. But they can say these absurd things, but it doesn't occur to them that what they're saying is nonsense, because the same thing happened with DNA. What are the chances that DNA is going to be produced by chance? I'm a digital computer design engineer. The DNA for the simplest organism we can talk about, a fungus, or one of these things that's got 500 chromosomes or 500 genes in it, is so astoundingly complex, and they can't even make one of those in the lab yet. Maybe they will someday, but that won't prove that it happened by chance. You know, you're gonna have to look at, there's that there's that strange cartoon with this guy's pouring over his lab equipment saying, if I ever make this in the lab, that'll prove that it could have happened by chance. You know, where he's denying his own work, that what he's doing is so special. You know, after millions of man hours of work, maybe we'll make a cell in the lab. But anyhow, that's isn't that interesting? The only human male alive during this time. That's what I was just talking about. This is first order nonsense. When it was done, well, I won't re-say, but that's basically the second point there. And for this to happen, not just once, but again for mitochondrial Eve is entirely incredible, because they don't hold that the Y chromosome Adam and the mitochondrial Eve were contemporaries or anything. They could have been. So now you got the whole thing bottling down to one person. You know, okay, it's a tribe of 1,000 people. Only one of them passes on his DNA. Then it goes down, and then a woman does the same thing. She becomes the only progenitor to the entire human race. So you've got this happening twice. Just, you know, and baffling, impossible. Okay, and that third bullet is what I was explaining before. Okay, calibrating the mitochondrial clock, and this is that Ann Gibbons that I was mentioning to you. And this is a quote out of her book. Mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose mitochondrial DNA was ancestral to that in all living people, lived 100 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. Okay, so the first number they're giving is the accepted in conventional reading, but her studies found that it was would be only because it was about 20 times faster or something like that. Okay. That's the next sentence. No one thinks that's the case. So she takes her whole study and just says it's meaningless because she wants to remain in the system, you know, to get grants, to
Peer
get
pressure.
Yeah, it's not just peer pressure; it's career pressure. You know, I think there was a guy who made this statement. It's really impossible to convince something that something's not true when your career depends on it. You know, your salary depends on it, and that's basically what's happening here. Really, that's literally the case. People are canceled for ways straying from the case.
Actually, you almost have to read that in the inverse. And why did she even mention the 6,000 years unless something inside of her believed that and had to lay it out there?
Yeah. Well, it was the natural conclusion of the study she had done. You know, but she was laying it out, and this was actually in a comment after she had already put this stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, okay. Now here is an interesting drawing. By the way, how much time we got? 8:09. We're getting close to the end.
Keep going.
Okay.
I've kept him here to 9 o'clock.
Okay. Well, I won't keep you that long.
Don't do that.
We'll speed it up a little bit, but still, this is all very interesting stuff.
No, it's very interesting, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So here is the Eve. Okay. You're getting. Dave told me. I told him we're going to be doing mitochondrial Eve as well as Y chromosome Adam. He said, "Well, tell him it's a bonus, and it'll be okay." So that's what I'm doing. You're getting a bonus here. Okay?
All right.
And we're getting to Glen Rose about midnight.
Yeah. but here you see the red dot in the middle is what's called the consensus sequence. And basically, what it is you look for the thing that is the closest to all of them in your studies, and you can tell by how you make this diagram. And I was asking you, what is the X and the Y in here? Basically, I think he throws in the X and the Y in order to show that something can be close together, like these two can be close together right here, but far from that, or they can be here and over here, and now they're farther apart from each other. And so the data does have that kind of thing. How he gets it into an X and Y rather than some other format, I don't know. But that's what's happening there. And I'm kind of curious, noticing that there's nothing that's really close to the consensus sequence there. And that's kind of, they all cluster, they all get, and a ring is 50 mutations, so about maybe 5 or 10 mutations out, they start clustering. And he says people on average are only 21 mutations removed from Eve. And by the way, I shamelessly stole this from the presentation by John Sanford, I should give him credit. But that's what you see for the mitochondrial Eve, and the same thing is true for the Y chromosome Adam. It looks very similar. The only thing, instead of it being here we've got 200 mutations, and on the other one, we got 50 mutations. So the target's a little different, but that's because of the mitochondrial Eve being so much smaller than the Y chromosome. And here there are 21 mutations removed from Eve. That's the mitochondrial Eve, and the other one I think was 300. Yeah, 300. So if there are 200 mutations, so there's 200. So in the middle of that second ring there would be the average distance.
And you're talking about these tiny mutations, not the ones that show up like in a chromosome 127 test or anything. That happens like every, 4 to 8 generations. So you're talking minute size mutations,
Well,
right?
these are probably SNPs, single nucleotide.
Okay.
What does P stand for?
Yeah.
Polymorphisms. Single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Okay.
Yeah. So just one little on this big long chain, and
Yeah.
A becomes a
That
T.
probably could even be junk DNA per se.
What's that?
I said it could possibly be junk DNA even. That
Yeah.
that
Well,
we don't
there-
even have cataloged
You
yet.
know there is no such thing as junk DNA.
Right, yeah,
But,
but
yeah.
it's just not
Not
cataloged.
gonna let that pass.
Yeah.
But yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
these are probably the ones that are in the genes, I would imagine. So okay, so anyhow, that's and that consensus sequence then becomes the starting point, and so we have a good standard for both the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA of what the model would have been. So now here's something that you gotta really realize. The different. This is for Eve. Who is the Y chromosome Eve? Mitochondrial Eve. Sorry. Who is the mitochondrial Eve? Eve, right? Okay. Who's the Y chromosome Adam?
Noah.
No.
Noah, yeah.
And is that that's a very important thing to notice, because Noah brought us back to convergence because nobody else lived. All the males of his generation died. So we have a good explanation for both the Y chromosome Adam and the mitochondrial Eve, where they don't have a good explanation for either one. And the fact that they're different. Yeah.
Now, is it possible to date this, and does it support, for example, the 6,000-year-old Earth
Well, I think I have a slide on that. Let me see.
and the date of the flood?
When did Adam or Noah live? Okay, because it's the Y chromosome Adam, but it's really Y chromosome Noah, is what we would say. Okay, claimed dates range from 57 to 340,000 years ago, and that's of course the conventional dating. Average accumulation 300 Y chromosome total mutations, and now that's 150 generations. Two mutations per generation is 300 mutations. Okay, which is, like I said, really tiny out of 62 million. So they're really going to be important. The Y chromosome accumulation rate 2, and I think that I changed that. That's from the one in the Sanford, but I think it's a little closer to what's reality. About 150 generations is 300 mutations per person, and that gets you the number of that in the second line. Okay, multiplied by 25 years per generation. Who knows what's the right number there? But if you do it, that's 3,750 years ago. Okay, and the flood was about 4,400 years ago. So we're in the ballpark. But all you'd have to do would be to make it, instead of 25 years, make it 30 or so, and you'd get the right number. And there's many other things that could be messing these numbers up. One thing to think about is that mutations, not all mutations are easily carried and don't have an effect on their offspring. Some of them kill them. Okay, so those get wiped out. Some of them will debilitate them, slow them down. Give them allergies, give them all kinds of things that may or may not affect their reproductive system, their immune system, all kinds of things. So, these all have to be taken with a grain of salt. But we're in the ballpark. We're right where we ought to be. So that's what Noah comes out to be.
So if you had 30 years per generation, it'd be 4,500 years.
Is that what you come up with in your head?
So the floods are closer to 40, 30, 50. So that's between 25 and 30 years.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And that's Now you say, well, they probably had kids when they were younger then, but they probably kept having kids until they were older. In those days they probably had 10, 12. Because how many did we were talking about? what was the 57?
Oh, 55
55?
is the Jewish tradition for Adam and Eve.
Okay, taken from Josephus.
Josephus.
So, but anyhow, I don't think many people had that, but, you know, a lot of them had 10 or 12, and that wouldn't be unusual. So, and if they're going to do that, they're going to extend beyond towards menopause time, you know. So you probably, 25, 30 could be quite reasonable. Remember, this is Noah, not Adam, so biblically it's about 4,400 years ago. We have a pretty good handle on that. When did Eve live? Same thing. On average, 21 accumulated mitochondrial mutations, and that was off that chart we just saw. The mutation rate is 0.1 per generation, and that might even be not very accurate. When I went in Wikipedia, they were all over the map. It was really hard. What was happening is they're apologizing because their mitochondrial clock is not working. You know, it's not ticking in any kind of reasonable way, and all their numbers are not making sense. 21 divided by 0.1 is 210 generations. So remember the other one was 150, this is 210, so we're in the same ballpark. Multiply by 25 years and you get 5250. And remember, we're counting back to Eve now rather than Noah, so you would have another 10 generations to go, and 6,000 would be your target rather than 4,400. So makes pretty good sense. I think that was it. Okay. This is a high-low quality thing. Maybe we don't have enough time to go through there, but basically Jensen's been, you know, he's out on a limb because he's putting himself out to anybody to criticize, and there are so many things that can be done that are unethical or just wrong. If you're committed to getting a certain number and you got to get that number, you'll filter the data. You know, this was way out. Throw that one out. You know, and do things like that to get it right. I'm sorry, I don't want to be paranoid, but that's just what we see. You can see there was a book that came out, Bones of Contention. I think it was not the most recent one, but the original Bones of Contention. And they were talking about Lucy, and they were doing some dating. I believe it was on Lucy, and they said, well, this one comes out to so many years, but we throw that one out because it's, you know, it's way out of the ballpark. And they do that a lot with rock dating, because they'll have multiple radiometric dating techniques, and they're accurate to within, you know, this much, but they're different. You know, there should be, if they're accurate to this much, then they should line up, and they don't. And so they said, well, this one's way too early, and this one's way too late, so we pick this one here. And that happens a lot in the radiometric dating. So that's what's happening, you know, kind of thing here. And it just is the case, you know. When I talk to these people, that's what I end up with. These differences represent ticks of the Y chromosome clock. But how fast does the clock tick? Early data indicated that these ticks represent about 200,000 years, but the results were based on low-quality DNA sequencing. Later analysis using higher quality sequencing revealed a 10x faster clock tick, but the data were filtered to bring the results in line with earlier conclusions. And so what Nathaniel Jensen did was he went back to the original data, got the raw data, and did his own non-filtered representation, and that's what he came out with. So we probably should see this. This is out of the Middle East, and this is National Geographic, so this is not a young Earth creationist position. But you see where the center is right here, right? A little bit North Africa, but also Israel, Lebanon, and anywhere in that area would be a candidate, in Mesopotamia, something like that.
Tower of Babel?
Tower of Babel? Yeah, you know, so you know, we're in the range. It's not down here in Australia or even in someplace in lower Africa. It's right up there in that area. Okay. Any comments? Just human versus chimp. They were saying for so long that they're 99 or 98.5%. When you actually take one here and look at them, they're different. In fact, a chimp has like 2% more DNA than a human. So how can they be 1.5% different if they have 2% more DNA? They were obviously just taking the genes, the genetic material, and comparing them. And chimps and humans have the same genetic material. We use collagen. We use the things for the blood and everything else. So there's going to be a lot of similarity. In fact, I don't know if you know, but we're I think something like 55% identical to a banana. Just an idea. And so, because you've got all the same stuff in us, they're similar.
Of course, yeah.
And so here is another one out of that presentation also. The red line is really what you're most interested in, that's fitness. And this is using a model, a program that does modeling and showing how our fitness is really dropping off quite significantly with time. And I think, we can see that, right? Allergies, the immune system is the one that's really suffering from that because it's just so finely tuned. You want to be allergic to or resistant to things that are foreign, but not all foreign things. You want to be resistant. You don't want to be resistant to fish or peanut butter or all these different other things. It's got to let those things go through. But if it's a bacterium, it's got to get that. When that falls out of balance, you're really in big trouble. And that's what we're seeing to a large extent.
What are the green and red? Why is there two?
I'm sorry. The green is standard deviation. So I think that's just telling you kind of a statistical thing that was for the scientists' information. Okay. Now here's another. There we go. Declining lifespans of Noah and his descendants. And one of the things that John Sanford really pointed out when he was doing this is that this is not estimates or predictions. This is the Bible tells us their ages, okay, and tells them when they had their offspring. So you can draw these red dots by the actual physical data. What is curve fitting is that number there, y equals 1064.7 times x to the negative 0.766 power. Those are curve fitted. But you do that. That's we don't know how fast these things are happening. But the fact that they have all come into a straight line, fit this line so perfectly, tells you that first of all the curve is correct. I mean, the shape of the curve is correct, and those numbers up there represent something in real life that you can go out and learn about. So there's Noah, 950. Then comes Shem at 600, and then Abraham at 175, and then Moses at 120, and then King David at 70, and then your average Roman soldier at 45. And now we've kind of come up from that. We're no longer down there, but that's because of cleanliness and health. We've been able to cure a lot of diseases like leprosy that were rampant at that time. But now, they were down to 45 at that time, according to records, I guess. Okay? So, are we right and the world wrong? I kind of covered this already, so I won't be blunt. Yeah, secular pseudoscience is founded on the false, illogical presupposition of the big assumption. And it is. I'm sorry, but you just can't exclude a possibility that they're not saying that miracles don't happen. If they said miracles don't happen, they would be materialists. And they would be expecting you to be a materialist. They don't want to do that. They want to say, go ahead, have your God, and your miracles and everything, but don't bring them into the laboratory. But if this evidence is showing that, which is what the intelligent design theory is all about, is saying these evidences that we're seeing are things that are showing that they couldn't have happened by chance. Way, way, way out of the possibility. And also the fine-tuning is showing that. When you see these things, you can assume, you can start saying, well, maybe that's a miracle. And they'll say, well, you can't have miracles because that's a science stopper. Once you say it's a miracle, science ends. No, it doesn't. Not if you're a proper scientist. A proper scientist would say, that sure looks like a miracle, but science is always tentative. You hold it with a loose hand, and you say, okay, prove me wrong, see what's correct. And they will say, well, miracles have all been proven to be false, but they haven't. All the things that we have now in terms of the fine-tuning, all these different things, they haven't been found to be false. Yeah, the fact that thunder comes from giants bowling upstairs, yeah, that's been found to be false, But they take those silly things like that, and nobody, even like Isaac Newton, who was, the scientist who founded modern science, didn't call all of those things miracles. He left them to be discovered in the future. Okay. Some phenomena are assigned tortured, twisted, clearly impossible natural causes, where a supernatural, miraculous cause is simple, logical, and obvious. And we should be allowed to do that. And we need to take that stand, and especially for our kids. They need to, otherwise they'll just get swallowed up by the system in thinking that the science is proven. Methodological naturalism is not science. It is not something that comes from going in the laboratory and testing. It is something that it's an encumbrance you put on yourself before you go into the laboratory. and filter your results on that basis. Okay. Well, maybe we got enough. You want to go through any more? About 8:26. We call it quits.
Go another 10 minutes.
Okay. This I think is probably the last one. Why do secularists embrace the big assumption? Not only secularists, but also a growing number of Christians. And I think that's a real concern for me. Is that a lot of Christians are, and that's a problem because once you've made a what do you call it out of Genesis 1 to 11 a myth or a metaphor, where's that going to end? I would like to talk to one who's one of these that believes in the old earth to say, do you think that Jesus walked on water? Well, they'll probably say yes, I do. Well, why? Well, the Bible says so. Well, then if the Bible says so and you believe it, then why don't you believe it when Jesus said, or when God said, out of his own hand that he created the universe in 6 days and there was a flood, and on the 745th day, of a year, I'm making these numbers up, on the 15th day, at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the flood began. So it's almost that exact. Believe it. If you're not going to start, if you're going to start not believing Genesis 1 to 11, that's going to creep through everything, and it has. There's no hell. Did you know that? That's not even the latest thing. That's been around for quite a while now. Why? Because it doesn't make sense to them. How could there be a hell? How could God have a hell? Well, the Bible says there is. In fact, Jesus talked more about that than he did about heaven. But that's what happens there. The most nefarious, back to the why do secularists embrace the big assumption? The most nefarious are engaged in an all-out attack on God. And then there's the Romans 1:18-20. And if I can get this point to it, I guess I can't do it on here, can I? But you know the verse where it's saying that nobody doesn't believe in God. They believe in God, but they suppress God.
They pick and choose. Yeah.
Others, and that same Romans 1:18-20 applies to these others too. Others don't want to resist the trend of reasons for refutation, for reasons of reputation, funding, acceptance, fear of shunning or being canceled, etc. And that's a really powerful thing, right? So, it kind of sounds nicer, but it's almost as bad as the other. You're saying that God does exist, but then you're not following God. That's that's serious stuff. Still others have not been taught critical thinking, but rather have been indoctrinated in the secularist perspective and think that almost all scientific evidence supports their position.
Yeah,
as
that's
I
a big
did.
one.
I'm sorry?
That's a really big
It
one.
is.
Because you tell people, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
I mean, what makes sense about evolution? Nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't. And there's so many places you can say that. And that's what happened
But
when
they
I was...
think, well, somebody smarter than me figured that out and they understand it. No,
Yeah.
they don't.
And that's what I was expecting when I was a theistic evolutionist asking a young earth creationist. And, I was expecting to say, well, there's this, and there's this, and there's this that you can't explain. Well, yeah, okay, but how about all the big body of evidence that, that secularists have? But what he was saying was the whole thing doesn't make sense. We're not evolving upward, we're evolving downward. And the facts show it,
Yeah.
There's no evidence. Richard Dawkins was asked at one time, can you give evidence of something that shows that caused an increase in the complexity of the organism? And he didn't know that it was a creationist asking him. And he thought and thought and thought, and they have about 28 seconds of him thinking, and finally he said, turn off the camera. He said, what are you, a creationist or something? And they got this all on camera because they had a third camera going at the time. But you can't, without license, without permission, you can't admit this stuff. But anyhow, but he calmed him down and said, no, just ask, give us, what would happen? And so he gets back on, and he says, he gives a total non-answer. People think that fish evolved, or that dinosaurs evolved into birds, but it was a very small process. He didn't answer the question that was asked, which is, can you give an example of an evolutionary thing that increased the complexity of the organism? So that's the same kind of thing. They don't have an answer for these things.
Yeah, that's the second law of thermodynamics, is an entropy where everything heads toward disaster and chaos, degrading.
Yep. Yep. And as an engineer, computer engineer, I don't usually use the thermodynamic one because you can have entropy very low at the beginning. It's just all in one spot. It doesn't really. But if you're going to talk about the the mathematical entropy, that you're always going from the less probable to the more probable. That means when you go backwards, you're going towards the less and less and less and less probable until when you get to the beginning of time, and we now know there is a beginning of time, things were in the universe was in its most least probable state ever. That means it's most impossible state, you know? It couldn't have happened by chance. That's just right there, it's a killer. But that's what it means. That's what the law of entropy, the mathematical law of entropy means. The most impossible time, the most improbable state of the universe was at the beginning. And that's because God put it together, and it's been falling apart ever since. So I think that's the last. It is. So
Good, stop it.
Thank you.
good. Okay.